10,000 years ago, a major revolution occurred. Suddenly, there was an abundance of food. Man went from hunter-gatherer to farmer. But in one area, we are still hunter-gatherers, in the area of energy. We still gather wood, oil, coal, and gas. Our hunting grounds now cover vast areas. The whole world has been combed in our quest for energy. Even our feeding grounds are no longer safe. But the hunt causes problems, huge problems. Climate change, health issues, shortages. The price is high in all respects. We are happy when the oil price drops, although we know that it's bound to increase in the end to ever higher levels. Fossil fuels have become a source of speculation, and speculators want to earn money. That's the bottom line. Fossil fuels mean power, and supplies may be forthcoming or cut off at will, which could lead to war. Fortunately, the search for gas and oil seems to be losing ground to a new revolution: the large-scale harvesting of sunshine.
I don't think anybody's understanding how big this is or how big this could be.
I think it's going to become one of the largest growing, fastest growing industry sectors in India.
One of the real things challenged about the industry is we have to quit thinking small, we have to think big.
And I see this spilling to our neighboring countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, all of them.
The solution for solar is not to think about, a few panels here, a few panels here. It's a field full of panels of arrays.
We've taken our revenues from about $10 million in 2004 to projections of about $1.4 billion this year. So extremely rapid growth, tripling for the last 2 years.
The world has changed, and so has solar. Solar is cost-effective today.
I don't think the average